And hello, everyone. I'm Robert Adducci, and I'm here with Bill Bridges, co-creator and line developer for Fading Suns. Thanks to Jim Kitchen and all the other admins for the tabletop RPG group on Facebook for allowing us to be in this group and to host this. So, hi, Bill. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, great.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah. So we are here. This is the 30th of March, and we've got a Kickstarter going, the Pax Alexius Kickstarter for Fading Suns, and I wanted to make this opportunity to kind of talk about Fading Suns in case people had not heard about it before, and kind of maybe give you a reason to back this if you have not backed it yet. If you like science fiction RPGs, this is definitely the RPG for you. So, Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about Fading Suns?
Fading Sun, science fiction RPG. We call it a far future passion play because it's a dark ages and space setting. So you've got nobles, priests, merchants, an emperor, and all sorts of medieval-esque things going on in the far, far future. Basically, humanity spread out among the stars and created a republic of high technology and universal emancipation. Then they fought over it and squandered it and lost it. And in the ruins has arisen a new empire, and the worlds are now divided between the noble houses, and there's a universal church that looks out for the souls of everyone, because there's an apocalyptic sort of thing looming over everyone, and that is that the suns themselves seem to be dimming, or fading as they call it. And no one knows why. So, of course, the church has all sorts of ideas on this, but other people do too. So one of the things players might be able to do eventually is hopefully help solve the phenomenon of the fading suns. And we've got a whole new era of Fading Suns. The game originally came out in 1996, and we kept a backstory going each year, and we haven't visited that in quite some time, so we've got some catch-up we're doing with this new Fading Suns edition. We're in an era now called the Pax Alexius, named after Emperor Alexius. It is now the Peace of Alexius, following what was called the Emperor Wars, which were many years of very, rough warfare, tearing up the known worlds as everyone was fighting to become emperor. But Alexius Hawkwood won the throne, and so now we're finally getting into a sort of era of peace. There's no outright war, but there's still a lot of cold wars going on among the noble houses. And then there's a whole new frontier, the Voldrock Star Nations, who are called barbarians by the known worlders. And we're starting to extend into their space now. The Emperor has taken a wife who is a Voldrock shield maiden, and he has produced an heir, and this has given him claim to one of the Voldrock worlds. And so the known worlders are now spreading out, trying to extend the peace of Alexius, and there's all sorts of other threats still going on from the old timeline. The symbiotes are still trying to get into the known worlds, although they've been blockaded on a planet called Stigmata. And it's a little more quiet there than has been for a while, but they're still there. They're basically these shape-changing creatures that can infect people and turn them into symbiotes to join them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Vow hegemony. The Vow are very mysterious, very high-tech aliens, and they've pretty much shut their borders. They really don't want much to do with humans, and they do all sorts of strange things in their diplomacy with humans that lead people to think that they're kind of being screwed with by the Vow on high levels. But you really don't know what's going on with them yet. And then there's another whole civilization, spacefaring, called the Kurga Caliphate. But they've recently been cut off from the known worlds. There was this one world that was being fought over between House Hazat of the known worlds and the Kurgans, called Hera, and the jump gate from there led deeper into Kurgan Caliphate space, but that gate has been closed. And so now no one can reach the Kurgan Caliphate directly. You'd have to travel all the way through Voldoc space to do it. So no one's exactly sure what's the most up-to-date that's going on in that Caliphate for a while now.
So what are some of your inspiration for Fading Suns?
Pretty much every science fiction I read growing up. It's got all sorts of stuff in there. You've got E. E. Doc's Lensmans. You've of course got some Frank Herbert Dune in there too. Though there's E. E. Sorry, there's H. Beam Piper, Space Vikings, and some of his other works. So, Cordwainer Smith's another one. It's just all sorts of the old classic sci-fi, space opera stuff. Obviously every movie too. Fading Suns is just aimed to be one of those kind of settings where if you see an idea in a science fiction movie, go, hey, I want to play that. There's a way to do it in Fading Suns. There's a place for it.
Nice. So, what was the inspiration for having the kind of impetus of the game to be these fading suns?
Just add that dark element, that apocalyptic thing. This was back in the 90s when that was all quite in vogue, but it's still a great, background thing to where why people still cling to a church, even though they're in a spacefaring setting. Why nobles, can have that sort of we're in charge thing. Anytime there's some sort of crisis, even a slow-moving one, people seem all too ready to give up their freedom to a authoritarian who will claim to keep them safe. So it's a looming background. It's also a big mystery that, hopefully one day maybe people can solve it. It might be tied in somehow with the legacy of the Anunnaki jump gate makers, this ancient alien race no one knows anything about really, except that they left their high-tech equipment behind, the jump gates and all sorts of other strange things. And the phenomenon could be tied into that, so exploration might be necessary.
Nice. And you've kind of talked about the emperor, and you've talked about the church. A lot of Fading Sun seems very sort of feudal in nature. What is like? How does that play into the game?
Well, anytime you've got nobles and knights and priests, it's all fun. You throw in the classic sci-fi merchants and traders and all that into there also, except now they're formed into guilds, a very medieval type thing, and that allows them to sort of keep their technological secrets to themselves. These are guild secrets, and so everybody's got their own power base. There's the nobles who claim the territories and the right to war, and there's the church who claims, hegemony over the souls of all sentient beings, and then you've got the guilds who they keep the secrets of high tech. So the only way anybody's still able to be spacefaring is because of the knowledge they have. So they each have their little power base, and they're able to vie among each other to sort of maintain what power they have during this time.
Cool. So we're almost a week into our Kickstarter. I just posted the link in the chat there. In the comments, and to me right now it says 99,000. To Bill, it was just saying we're over 1,000. I don't know where we're at, somewhere right there. But we asked for 20,000 euros, and so we made that within the first hour, which is great, which really says a lot to the original game and to the interest that people still have. What is it, 20, 30 years now? When did it first come out?
1996.
96, all
Same
right.
year as the first Game of Thrones book.
Oh,
By
nice.
a curious coincidence.
So, speaking of Game of Thrones, this is a lot of very feudal, like you were saying before. So, you feel like there's a lot of room for the Game of Thrones kind of stories here?
Yeah, if you're into that kind of backbiting politics, Fading Suns definitely has a lot of room for that sort of thing. So yeah, we've jokingly called it Game of Thrones in space before.
Nice.
I also call it, Three Musketeers in space because it has that heroic swashbuckling side too. But Three Musketeers also has the scheming church side, the cardinals and stuff who are trying to outdo the throne and embarrass the queen, and then the musketeers have to get involved on their mission. Very player character sort of stuff.
Nice.
Except this time they can carry blasters with them instead of just swords.
So going back to the Kickstarter, what is different about this version of Fading Suns? This is the fourth edition, technically. Is that right?
This is the fourth edition of Fading Suns. Full color, first of all, so visually it's going to be stunning. Previously we'd only had color covers, but yeah, full color throughout this time. It takes the previous rule system, victory point system, and it really updates it. There have been a lot of innovations in role-playing and tabletop games since the last real edition where it was innovative, which was I guess the second edition, and so we've been able to do a lot more stuff, fix some of the problems that were there, which is really what new editions and role-playing games are for. As the game evolves and you play test a lot, you find out where the mistakes are and where things can be tweaked. And so the new system improves on a lot of that. It's a lot more dynamic. We call it the victory point system because when you roll your dice, you get victory points based off what the die roll is. And previously, those really just added to damage dice, but in the new system, you have all sorts of things you can do with them. You can spend them to overcome an opponent's defenses. You can boost your own defenses against an attack coming at you. You can spend to increase the damage you do, or you can spend to line up your next shot and get some precision bonuses for whatever you're going to do next. So there's a lot more leeway, a lot more agency going on of what you can do. We've beefed up the previous edition. We called them benefits, is a very medieval sounding name, but this time we're just going to call them perquisites or perks. We've beefed those up so they're a lot cooler, and they allow you to do all sorts of different things. Among them, to do all sorts of cool things with victory points on a sort of meta level that allows your characters to be a little different. So just priests have a perk called inspiring, where they can basically give their victory points to another player so they can spend them on theirs. So it's just for a last minute defense or to punch through with some extra damage or whatever. So basically the priest is exhorting the person to be the best they can be.
Nice.
Right, and whereas like nobles have one called Imperious, where they can basically add to their. We have a system. It's not just physical combat. We have social combat. We call it influence, where people can try to, castigate someone into feeling guilty and spilling the beans about some sin they've committed, or you can just try to daunt somebody, or you can befriend them, things like that. But the noble perk Imperious allows them to boost their own defenses against someone who's trying to use influence against them. But instead of spending their own victory points, they get some free victory points from what's called the victory point well. So they basically get a little extra boost to deny somebody from, trying to overcome their mental defenses.
Nice. So you kind of talked about a little bit about the characters and whatnot. What is the sort of core mechanic of Fading Suns?
Well, in the Fading Suns, you've got skills and you've got characteristics. Anytime you're going to do something, you need the skill for it. And these are things such as fight, which is a hand-to-hand combat. There's impress, which is when you want to, say, daunt someone or castigate them. There's charm, if you're trying to be more friendly, like befriending them or entreating them. There's tech redemption if you're trying to fix something, sneak when you're trying to, stealthily move past some guards, etc., etc. And anytime you're going to do one of those things, you get to bolster your role with a characteristic, such as your strength or your dexterity, your presence, your wits. There are basically 9 different characteristics, and so any role is a combination of a skill plus a characteristic. And each of those ranges from 1 to 10, so when you put them together, you get a number from 1 to 20. And so you will roll that number or less on a d20. What you want to do, we've called it before the Price is Right system, where you want to roll as high as you can without rolling over. And what you roll on the die gives you victory points as long as you roll your goal number or below. If you roll over, you fail. You don't get anything. But say your goal number, let's say your fight is 6 and your strength is 6 and you're hitting someone with your fist. That would give you a 12, 6 plus 6 goal number, so you need to roll that or less. And if you rolled a 9, well, that's under your number, you've succeeded, and the number you roll on the die gives you your victory points. You get 9 victory points. And of those, you'll spend some of those to overcome the person's armor, if he has any. If he's really just wearing normal clothes, he's only got about 1 resistance, so you'll spend 1 of your victory points to punch through that armor. And now you've got some extra victory points. You can either save them for your own defense if there's someone else you think is going to be hitting you, or you can spend them to increase your damage against somebody, make that punch land really hard. Because once you've gotten through their resistance, your weapon's damage your weapon will determine your damage, and a fist does like 2 damage, a rapier does like 5 damage. So once you're through those defenses, it does that damage automatically, but you can increase it by spending your victory points.
Nice. So, in Fading Suns, what's sort of the impetus for most characters to kind of adventure, to be out there, to kind of do what players and characters do in role playing games.
Well, a lot of them is just going out to adventure, to make names for themselves, maybe to make some money too, depending on the characters and stuff. Everybody in Fading Suns obviously wants power on some level, if for no other reason than to be left alone, to just have their own freedom. But it's a world full of these factions, and they're always trying to gain, an edge against other factions. So they're always needing people to do things for them, even if they're not of their faction. So you've got a lot of people willing to patron people on missions, tasks. It could be such as like in the Three Musketeers, where Cardinal Richelieu, needs someone to steal the Queen's jewels, basically, so they're not there when she needs them. And so then someone else will hire the players, in a sense, to run and go get the jewels back just in time for the ball, so the queen's not embarrassed. Or it could obviously be something with higher stakes, such as spying behind enemy lines, getting the schematics of some weapon of war that they're building secretly, or whatever, those sorts of things. The idea is we look at player characters as a unit of sorts, and that we call them a troop. And the most common, the one we sort of assume is the most common, is the noble entourage. One or more of the players in the group is a noble, and the others form their entourage of priests and merchants and whoever else who's hanging on, just either for the fun or because they've been hired or for whatever reason. Like a priest might be the noble's confessor, a merchant might be his hired pilot, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's numerous reasons for them to get together and kind of stick together. And even though there's a lot of pressures pulling them apart, their own factions might be, disagreeing with each other. Such as one of our classic enmities in the game is between House Hawkwood and House Staccatos. And if you've got two characters of those houses in the same entourage, you might have some sniping going on, but ultimately they're going to have to work together to form their own, to get their own power in the world and stuff, to make money and success.
So you mentioned the houses. The houses are your noble houses. How do they sort of play into the overall politics besides the sort of classical feudal way?
Well, there's numerous houses. The ones we call the major houses. Those are five of them, and those are the royal houses, because they hold what are called vote scepters. They get to choose the next emperor. And Alexius happened to win enough votes. When Fading Suns originally came out, it was a tie-in with a computer game that we were making at the same time, The Emperor of the Fading Suns. And that's where you played out the Emperor Wars. And in that game, you could play any of the houses and try to win the Emperor Wars. For the tabletop game, we chose one winner, the Hawkwoods, and went on from there. But if something were to happen to Emperor Alexius before he's able to set, you might say, the right laws and rules for his successor, it would fall back on the royal houses again to choose the next successor. Now, the church has some vote scepters also, and so does the Merchant League. They just don't have as many as the royal houses, so they don't have as much power in that. For many, many centuries before there was an emperor, there was an original emperor, but something bad happened to him. But he set up the system under which they all lived for the next few centuries, the regency. So basically the houses would sort of trade sort of musical chair seats on who would be regent until the Emperor Wars got ignited and someone was going to actually try to claim to be the new emperor. So they're basically involved in the politics constantly of making sure that their houses are maintaining their territories, their planets, expanding their territories, and being in the right place at the right time in case someone has to choose a new emperor.
So aside from the nobles, what kind of other power groups are there?
Well, there's the church, and there's all the different sects. The main sect is what's called the Earth Orthodox sect. And they've set most of the rules, but the other sects come along with their own little interpretations, and the church has had to recognize them for various reasons. There's Sanctuary Aeon, they're healers. There's Temple of Vesti, they're basically fanatic zealots who like going around burning heretics. There's Brother Battle, they're warrior monks. They are the premier combat fighters in the universe. And they tend to guard pilgrimage paths, but they're also heavily involved in the Stigmata garrison fighting against the symbiotes. And the Eschatonic Order, they're basically occultists. So you can play any of them. One of the options in the game is a power called Theurgy. It's basically church magic, and some of these priests can learn some of this. It's kind of rare. Not a lot of people do it. But they're sort of on the other flip side of the coin from them are the psychics. Psychics are disliked, they're mistrusted. The church thinks it's a sin to be a psychic, but of course, player characters engage in all sorts of sins, so they'll want to be psychics sometimes, and so we do certainly have rules for psychic powers. Everything comes with a dark shadow side, however, too. Psychics have to worry about something called their urge. It's basically when a dark twin within them sort of wakes up and starts acting against their own interests and trying to eventually become a real boy itself, a doppelganger that
Hmm.
pops out.
Interesting.
That's extreme. But with Theurgy, your flip side is what's called hubris, which is basically once you start working with these divine powers, you might start getting a little bit, full of yourself.
Hmm.
And hubris manifests in things such simple things such as the countryside around you, like the animals, the milk is sour, things like that. Classic folklore sort of things,
Hmm.
up to an entirely whole worlds might become wastelands just by having you around them. At least these are the legends. There's a whole planet called Nowhere that is kind of a wasteland, but people hear legends of how it was once a, forested paradise, and the rumors are that it was a Theurgist with very high hubris who sort of destroyed that world.
Nice. So you kind of talked about, we talked about the nobles, we talked about the church. Well, first, a little bit more on the church. What is it a church of?
It's called the Universal Church of the Celestial Sun, and basically when humanity spread out among the stars in the era called the Diaspora, when they were just going all over the place, there was a guy who started preaching. He saw what was called the Holy Flame on a planet, and started preaching this faith of the Pan-Creator, the All-Creator. It was a faith for the humanity who was spread out among the stars and space, and he had disciples who followed him, and his story and his disciple who followed him became sort of a template for society. All the troops, in a sense, see themselves in some way as emulating the prophet and his disciples. So when you travel around with other people, even if they're just your employees, there's a sense in which there's a divine sanction to it, because that's what the prophet did. He traveled with his disciples,
Hmm.
and each of his disciples lent some sort of skill or ability, so they're seen as saints now, such as Paulus, who was considered the traveler. He was the star pilot who flew the prophet Zebulon on his missions. There was Saint Amalthea, who was the healer. She healed the prophet when he was suffering a spiritual sickness, and she's kind of the patron saint of the Sanctuary Aeon sect of healers. So it's basically the prophet and his disciples who set the religion, and Zebulon's successor was someone who was really just almost a clerk with him. He wasn't one of the disciples, but he created a whole church around it, and this was Palamedes Electo. And he created the Universal Church, and it just spread. It had some ups and downs during the Second Republic, which was the era that came next, and that was an era where people tended to go more for materialist, atheist concerns, high technology and such. But as the stars started to fade, that's when the apocalypse started descending down. Those kind of feelings, the church started getting more and more powerful, and then it took over from there. So it's got all sorts of complicated theology of basically of the Empyrean light spreading outwards like a sun, an invisible sun, and that every sentient person is a mirror that is meant to reflect that light back to the Empyrean. But if that mirror is tarnished, then the light doesn't reflect back properly. And so the role of every sentient is to keep their own soul mirrors from being tarnished too badly. And of course, the nemesis of this church is the dark, all the sort of shadowy things that are believed to exist way out in the dark between the stars. Each system has a jump gate that tends to be the farthest large body out in the system, such as in our system, it's out past Pluto. And everybody's afraid to go past those because it's considered that they're not sanctified, not safe. There are things out there, things in the dark, demons. There are also rumors of what are called void krakens, giant creatures that roam out there and sometimes come into the systems and basically destroy ships, basically like the legends of krakens in ancient times.
So, with so we've talked about the church, we've talked about the nobles. There's a third kind of major faction. What are they?
The Merchant League, they are basically the remnants of the corporations of the Second Republic when everything was starting to fall apart and the nobles were trying to seize everything. And the church was basically condemning technology. That's one of the other things they do. They think technology is what caused the fading suns phenomenon, and that man is sinful and using too much technology is wrong. The nobles and the guilds of the Merchant League were able to carve out an exception, but only after some warfare. And that exception basically allows nobles and guilds to use technology. They're considered to be martyrs of sorts, taking upon the sins of using tech for everyone else who's not allowed to.
Hmm.
And so basically, the corporations, they've maintained these technological secrets and patents of sorts, such as the Charioteers Guild. They're kind of traders and merchants, but they're also star pilots. They are the ones who have the sole technology to make the jump keys that hold the route so you can open a jump gate. This pretty much gives them a monopoly on being the star pilot. So if a noble house wants to pilot stars, they kind of have to hire charioteers to do it for them to get those jump keys. They can buy the jump keys, but that's really, really expensive.
Hmm.
And there's the Sacred Society of Engineers. They're basically into all sorts of weird high tech. A lot of them become cyborgs. They love implanting technology in themselves. There are the Scravers Guild. They are reclaimers. They basically, one of the big things for technology is not making it because a lot of people have lost the industrial capacity. So it's digging through the ruins of the old to find the Second Republic technology that still works and runs. And that's what their guild officially does. Unofficially, they're a thieves guild, basically. They're underworld mobsters.
Nice.
There's the Reeves Guild. They're the lawyers. And they're also the bankers. So they're one of the richest factions in the known worlds because if you want to keep your money safe, you pretty much have to do it in a Reeve bank. If you want loans, you pretty much have to go to the Reeves. And if you're on trial for something, you're going to want a Reeve lawyer. So it's lawyers, guns, and money with them.
Nice.
Right. And then there's the muster. They're basically a laborers guild, but they specialize in mercenary. They're soldiers. And on the dark side, they're also called chainers because they are involved in the slave trade, which is sadly legal in certain areas. So they basically move people back and forth, Shanghai people left and right on other worlds, and take them to where they're needed for labor. But if you're an actual member of the Muster Guild, doing various types of labor, that's basically they're the big union. They're the Teamsters. You pretty much have to pay them to get the labor done right.
Nice. So we kind of went through the basics of the different groups that characters can belong to, and we've kind of talked about a little bit about the basics of the system. Um, Tell us a little bit about how characters are created. How do you create your character for Fading Suns?
All right. Well, there are three factors to consider. It's basically class, faction, and calling. Your class is you're a noble, a priest, a merchant, or a yeoman. Yeoman is basically you're a free man, but you're kind of an individual. You're not a member of any of the major factions and organizations. Your factions are the noble houses, the church sects, and the merchant league guilds. There are also societies you can join for free men. That's mainly what the yeomans join. There's things like the Dispossessed. It's a band of mercenaries who were mustered out after the Emperor Wars, but kept going as a mercenary unit. There's the Society of St. Paulus, which is kind of an explorers club. There are the Vagabonds. They're kind of space hobos. And then there are the Voldrak warriors, basically the barbarians who are within the known world trying to make a name for themselves there. So, note if you're a noble, you'll choose from one of the five major noble houses, or if you get the faction book, you'll get a list of all the minor houses, and there are a lot of those too. And sorry, I got stuff beeping on my computer here. And if you're a priest, you're going to choose from one of the major sects or the minor sects that are given in the faction book. And you'll get a guild as a merchant. As a yeoman, you can basically choose mainly from the guilds list or from the opens list to just sort of emulate one of those sort of jobs, which are in the callings. So once you've chosen your faction, your class gives you access to certain callings, like nobles can be duelists, courtiers, conspiracists, sybarites, or ronin, all sorts of things like that. And then priests can be things like dream tender, which is like a psychologist, a healer, a mendicant, a monk, a templar, a brother battle. Now, if you're a brother battle, as you're calling, you first have to have the faction, so no one else can do that except the brother battle. For the guilds, there's things like bounty hunters, bankers, traders, tycoons, thieves. All factions have their own spies also, and when you choose a spy, you choose one of the agencies that are run by the houses or the sects or the guilds. But then you can also choose a cover story, which is another calling that you pretend to practice, even though
Nice.
you're really a spy.
That's awesome.
And then there are open callings also, like psychic or theurgist or cyborg, explorer, or artist. Those are the ones anybody can join.
Cool. So we've heard a lot about kind of the classes and your callings and the factions, and a lot of things seem to be very human centric. But in a lot of science fiction, there are aliens and things like that. Are there aliens here in Fading Suns?
There are indeed aliens. The core books have three of them, the ones that are probably the most well-traveled, and that would be there's the two cousin races of the Ur-Obun and the Ur-Ukar. They're it is pretty much known that their races were interfered with back in the past by the Anunnaki. They don't know that much about them, but the legends of the Obun and Ukar talk about these things, and the ruins on their worlds pretty much prove it happened. So they're kind of a mystery to people. But they both, the Obun can start with psychic powers or with theurgy, and the Ukar can start with psychic powers. So they start with a certain endowments that make them mistrusted by humans automatically, but they're still, some interesting characters. Ukar, they've been mistreated for many years. They're kind of a lot meaner than the Obun, who are more philosophical. Another race are the Voroks. They're basically giant six-armed brutes from a very wild feral planet called Ungavoroks, but they can become civilized and travel among normal people. They're a lot of fun to play. They have a small cast of nobles that are allowed when they're basically to be allowed off-world. You have to be declawed because their claws are poisonous. But the noble is allowed to keep one poisonous claw as a sign of their rank. And then if you get the faction book, you get access to all the other alien species. There's a whole host of them. They're the Atiri. They're basically sentient birds who can fly. They're the Ganok. They're monkey-like. They aren't really monkeys. They're something different and weird. They've got regenerative abilities, and they're very curious. You've got the Hero Nem. They're a reptilian race, very highly religious, very caste-oriented. The Ascorbites are insectoid aliens. They're very strange, hard to understand. They have a very alien psychology. There's the Shantor. They're horse-like. They're ungulates, four-legged. They're a little odd to play too. But they're a challenge, but they could be pretty fun. They're large to travel in spaceships, but it can be done.
So are they like centaurs or like what are they?
No,
What's
they're
their
actually
format?
kind of like horses, but
Okay.
their mouths are a lot more flexible. They can hold all sorts of things
Okay.
with them, but they can also get devices that help them do that also, because they don't have their own opposable thumbs, but they are sentient.
Hmm.
And Gosh, I know I'm missing some in my head. Oh, there's the Oroweem. They're
Mhm.
fish-like guys. They are also believed to have had some involvement with the Anunnaki in the past,
Mhm.
and sometimes through some sort of distant ancestral memory, they can access some knowledge that helps them work with relics and artifacts found in Anunnaki ruins.
So you've just given us a whole host of kind of alien species, but you said there were three in the core books. Is that right?
Yeah, the three main ones are the ones that are the most traveled throughout
Mm-hmm.
the known world: the Vorox, Uroba, and Urukar.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones are there. They tend to mainly stick to their home world, but you can obviously, any player character can be the exception and be one of the ones traveling the stars and doing other things.
So
So yeah, they're aliens to play.
okay, um, I've been showing some images, and if you guys are in chat and you have any questions for Bill, or any questions about the images, go ahead and throw them in there, and at the end here we'll get to some Q&A. Let's talk about the Kickstarter itself a little bit more. As we said, it's just past 100,000. What do you get? What's the kind of core of the Kickstarter, Bill?
Well, there are different levels, but really the core is the core books, depending on whether you're going to be a player or a game master. But there's the universe book, which talks about the setting. It basically tells you all about the history behind the game. I mean, all the main society groups, the factions, and how they operate together, and then all the planets of the known worlds. And that's a good book for anyone to read, whether they're just players or game masters or just curious about the setting in itself. Then there's the character book, and that gives you the game rules and the character creation, along with technology, all the weapons and equipment, and the occult powers, that psychic powers and theurgy. And finally, there's the Game Master book, which tells the Game Master how he can run the rules using NPCs. He gets some streamlined rules, so he doesn't have to worry about all the interesting thing resource management players can do in the game. He can do a little more streamlined.
Mm-hmm.
But that book also gives the game master lots of examples of NPCs, of creatures, and how to build creatures. Golems, what we call robots, basically, and strange, mysterious, occult things going on throughout the universe. There's a sample planetary setting, Hargard. It's the new world that Emperor Alexius has claimed from Voldrock. And then there's a big example of play and a sample drama. Dramas are what we call the adventures and
Mm-hmm.
scenarios, basically. And that's the sort of core books, but then there's the companion book, that's the faction book, and that gives you all the minor groups, the minor houses, the minor sects, including pagans. People aren't part of the church at all. The numerous guilds. There's tons of guilds, from brewers to wordsmiths to wranglers, and the alien species we talked about. The faction book also gives you an option to play one of the changed. Those are basically the genetically altered mutants. They come in all sorts of different varieties. And because the known worlds are full of superstitious serfs, they don't tend to like these changed at all. So they usually have to hide under cloaks and stuff to make sure they're not seen.
So what faction are they part of?
Any faction you want to. You could
Oh,
be a noble changed,
okay.
or you could be a priest changed. People are going to give you the side eye on that one, but you could do it.
Nice. So looking here, you talked about the kind of main core books. It looks like there's some other books that you have the option of getting, whether it's with, maybe add-ons or other reward levels. And I also see some tokens here. What are the tokens for?
The tokens are for victory points and weird points. Victory points are what you gain from your rolls to achieve things, and then you spend those to do cool stuff with them. Weird points are a little rarer, but they do all sorts of interesting things. You basically gain their perks that allow you to gain some weird points. But another thing that can happen is the GM can award you weird points as a form of applause when you've done something really cool, when you've done
Nice.
some great role playing. He'll throw out some weird points. Now the ones for the applause will go in what we call the troop coffer. The troop have their own little special coffer where they keep these, and anyone can spend those that are in the coffer at any time. But you can also have your own personal weird points. And one of the effects, you can spend a weird point to modify one of your actions and make it what's called favorable, which is basically you can roll 2 dice and take the best result. There's certain things in the game that might make your rolls unfavorable, which are, roll 2 dice, take the worst result. And those are, one of the stats is called capabilities. And sometimes you'll do something that requires one of those capabilities, and if you don't have it, your roll's going to be unfavorable. But you can always spend a weird point to cancel that. And so weird points do all sorts of fun stuff. If you're a psychic or a theurgist, you can spend weird points to basically greatly enhance your power and basically cut down on the defenses they're having to vie against. So that's what those tokens are for, to help keep track of those things. You can just use pen and paper, but it's a lot more fun and easier to just be gathering and spending the tokens rather than have to do all the math on the head or on a pad of paper.
For sure. And we, as of this recording here, the end of March, a lot of people are kind of in their homes right now, kind of looking for stuff to do. Are there going to be like digital versions of the tokens and stuff for people to use if they want a game online?
Yeah, I believe so. We'll certainly have some punch-out versions, and as they see there's a stretch goal, we'll hopefully make where we get some deluxe metal versions. But yeah, there should be PDF versions where people can make their own.
Yeah, and we've definitely been, over all of Ulysses products, kind of talking about getting more and more content on virtual tabletops and things like that to help people play
Right.
games digitally. Um, and again, if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments, and we'll get to those here shortly. Um, so you talked about a little bit about the faction book. What's the intrigues and escapades?
That's an adventure book. The first part of the book actually gives you all sorts of advice on how to scheme, basically. It talks about how nobles are raised from cradle to grave to basically to intrigue, to not only perform it themselves but to defend against other nobles' intrigue. The priests, they've got schemes of their own, and it talks about those and the kinds of things they try to pull off. And the guild, of course, has always the big play they're going after. So there's some advice there for players and game masters on how to run those guys. And then there are two fully fleshed out dramas that's basically scene by scene that game masters can run players to. And then there's a host of drama hooks, little ideas, plot ideas that game masters can expand on their own and to fit their own troop best. So
Nice.
there's lots of examples there on that.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about the Imperial Dossier book.
All right, those are kind of fun little books. Basically, the emperor has asked his administration to put out some books, some dossiers for his administration, from diplomats to his questing knights and cohorts, to talk about all these factions of the known worlds that they're going to have to deal with on some level or another. So each of these basically looks at one of these factions. Like there's one for House Hawkwood, one for the Earth Orthodox sect of the church, and one for the Reeves Guild. And it looks at these guys in detail, and there's lots of annotations done by the Imperial Eye, which is the Emperor's spy agency, that might correct the record in some areas. And there's also, in each of these books, comes with a fact book. It's basically examining a topic that is related to that faction, but it's also universal across all factions. So House Hawkwood has a fact book about the nobility and the ranks and how those are kind of determined, and fiefs and how nobles have land. Earth Orthodox talks about theology and scripture. It's mainly for the Earth Orthodox, but there's some ground rules there that apply to all the sects, even the Eschatonics or Temple of Vesti. And then the Reeves Guild has a section talking about money, which are the main currency is the Firebird, minted by the Emperor, but then there are also lots of minor currencies. And then there's a section on laws and punishments, crime and punishment, basically, on what's going to happen if you're charged with the crime, and all that sort of fun stuff, because player characters get charged with crimes
Of course.
all the
Of
time,
course.
and they'll want a Reeve to get them through it.
Nice.
And each of those books also has a rules section that give you new callings specific to these factions, some new perks, and even some creatures that are related to these factions in some way or other.
Hmm.
So they're a lot of fun.
So this sounds like so the Imperial dossiers. There are three of them in the
Yeah,
initial.
in this Kickstarter
Mhm.
there are three, but it's going to be a big series. Basically, each faction will get their own book eventually
Uh,
as we move forward.
do you have a plan for like are those just going to be put out separately, or are there going to be more Kickstarters for those?
Well, there'll be more Kickstarters for Fading Suns books, and
Mhm.
each Kickstarter will have its own theme, but it will include some Imperial dossiers for some new factions with each one.
Nice.
Such as upcoming, there might be the Brother Battle, might be the
Maybe.
Ducados. We'll
Nice.
see.
Awesome. And if a lot of people are kind of trying to pare down and maybe don't have a lot of room, or for whatever reason are not wanting to get kind of physical books, um, and so initially we did not have an all digital level for the everything level, but we've kind of added one because there's so many people wanted the everything in a PDF. We added a level so you could get everything in a PDF. So if you just like digital content, it's a lot of content, um, and so definitely check that out. Um, let's see. Is there anything else that you can think of before we get into some of the Q&A questions that you want to talk about?
Well, if people look through the stretch goals, there's a lot of fun stuff. They're basically play aids. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them aren't required, but they're going to be add-ons. But there's some are really cool. I noticed we just did an update where we explained more about what the play mats were for, because there was a little confusion. And I think those are a lot of fun.
What are they?
When we've done some play tests, basically when you're spending and gaining victory points and stuff, since we use the tokens, it's always good to have a little place on the table to put them so they don't get confused with other things. And the play mats basically give you a place to put your what's called your cash victory points, which you get from turn to turn, and then you spend. And then there's your bank, the ones that you're actually able to keep for a while.
Hmm.
That's limited by your character's level. But then there's some other things to keep track of, such as your characters have a stat called Revival, which is they get a limited number of those, but that allows them to regain some vitality. They basically take a breather and gain some hit points back in a sense. There's a stat called Surge. You have a limited number of those too, but those are basically emergency victory points for when you need them. Like if you failed your roll and someone's about to hit you and you really want to boost your defense, you can take a Surge and you get some free victory points there.
Nice.
And so this helps you. And there's also a spot to mark if your character's what we call overloaded. And that comes down to a whole interesting new thing in the game that it's called technosis. And it's about how the church really distrusts technology and how they were kind of right to do so. And basically, if your characters are carrying around too much high technology, and this is really only high technology of tech level 5 and above, you and I right now are speaking on tech level 4 devices that sometimes they'll reach up to tech level 5, but we're not really there yet. So we haven't encountered in our lives this sort of technosis effect. But
Mhm.
once humans got higher tech and start spreading among the stars, it started happening. And it basically means that if you're using a piece of technology and you're carrying more technology than your character has a capacity for, when you make a critical failure on a roll using that technology, you'll suffer a state called a technological compulsion. So, like if you're using an energy shield and you make a fail a roll to defend yourself and stuff, the compulsion for that is called reckless. Basically, you think nothing can harm you. You've got an energy shield, and so like daredevils in the Second Republic all had these things, and they'd jump off of buildings to just land on the street, slam, and survive and stuff because it was fun. And that's because they were crazy enough, compulsed by these things. So watch out. Something like if you're shooting a blaster in your critical fail, you're going to get destructive. You're going to want to see things burn, basically.
Nice. It looks like there is a deluxe D20 as an add-on. That
Yeah,
looks real
that
nice.
one's basically that one's very cool. The one's position is a jump gate symbol. That's the sign of the church, because you're always safe with the one. The 20, unlike most other games, is the bad thing in Fading Suns. You don't want to roll a 20. And that one on this particular die is marked with the dark sign. It's the brand they put onto psychics who've been misbehaving and other occultists
Nice.
and black magicians.
Nice, and that die is made out of high quality aluminum, and it's made by Level Up Dice. So check that out. It looks like there's a number of stretch goals that we've passed, including like 3D varnish upgrades, state cards, packs of those. Tell us about those.
Okay, yeah. Your character can come to different states. The physical states, those are the ones that people recognize from some other games. There's things like being dazed or stunned, uh, maimed kind of stuff. But there's also the ones that are influence attacks can affect you on, and those are the mental and social states. So someone can work to confuse you or scare you, daunt you, as it's called, and such. So if I use my impress plus presence and try to daunt you, the effect is that you are daunted. You are in the state of being daunted. And these cards are, you don't have to have them, but they're a lot of fun. They're easy because when, say, your character gets daunted, we can take that card out and put it on your character sheet to remind you to role play that. And so everyone else can look at it too and help remind you also uh, on that. And so that's how those work.
Nice. And so it looks like there's also some deluxe play mats, which are those are like the mouse pad material. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, those are a lot of fun. I've played with the Hexen ones they did. Ulysses has done,
Nice.
and they're great. They look good. They roll up well, and they don't move around on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very cool.
And as I mentioned, we just passed the €100,000 marks, or no, sorry, that's the $100,000 mark. So
Right.
we're still a little bit short. We're at €90,000. So if we get about another €10,000, we will unlock the metal deluxe tokens and this cool purple bag. Not to be confused with other purple bags that gamers have for dice. um, so that kind of covers the Kickstarter. Definitely go check that out. It is going to be live until April 14th. So we still got a couple weeks left to hit those stretch goals. Looking at the questions here, someone says, "Do we still have linked and opposing attributes like faith and ego?"
Right. Yeah. In the previous editions, we had those. Basically, the more faith you had, the less ego you could have, and vice versa. I've dropped them this time around because I never could get them to work exactly the way I wanted to. There's still a shadow of them in the game in the way psychic powers and urge work, and same thing for theurgy and hubris, and that they're somewhat opposed in that. So let's say you have four hubris and 6 theurgy, and you want to go up to 7 theurgy. Well, you can't because you're on a scale of 1 to 10, and 4 of those slots are already taken. So you have to do a little contest against your own hubris to be able to beat that and go up to 8. So they're opposed at first, but then they can be overcome. But no, we don't have the faith and ego anymore. Instead, partly also because those traits were always hard to bring into roles, and since the core of the system is a skill plus characteristic, to get the most mileage out of the characteristics, we really want to be able to add them to those skill roles.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, what we've got are 9 characteristics. They're broken up into 3 categories of body, mind, and spirit. So they're pretty good and they're pretty solid. So pretty much anything anybody can do can be broken up into those. So for instance, if you're shooting a gun at somebody and you're at short range, which is pretty not too far, you're going to use your dexterity plus your shoot skill. But if they're at long range, you're going to use your perception plus your shoot skill. So it's the same characteristics isn't always used for the same action. Conditions can change that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
so
yeah,
I think
we don't use the opposed ones anymore.
okay, and it sounds like you just sort of answered this next question. Are stats still balanced against each other to a cap of 10 for a pair?
Right. Yeah, that's what was the opposing attributes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't. The only ones that do that initially are the occult powers, but those can be overcome.
But you also said that that you kind of pair a stat, like you have a stat and then a skill. roll? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, every time you're going to use a skill, you get to bolster it with a characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just rolling your shoot skill. You get to add your dexterity if it's short range, or perception if it's long range. If you're using a sword, you pair it with your strength. If you're trying to befriend somebody, you're going to roll your charm plus your presence.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to outwit somebody, to like fast talking them, you might roll your wits plus charm. So there's different things for different things. Like if you're trying to, if someone's put you into a state and you're trying to shake it off, and let's say it's a mental state, then you're going to roll your focus skill, which is a kind of your meditation concentration skill, but you'll add to that your will, your characteristic for will
And
to help beat that.
what's the range of your characteristics and skills?
Those are 1 to 10.
Okay.
Skills are 1 to 10, and characteristics are 1 to 10. So they give you a number between 1 and 20,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what you roll as your goal number on the D20.
Okay.
So, like for instance, you're trying to fast talk somebody. You're going to take your charm skill of say 5, and add it to your wit skill of 6, and that gives you 11 or less to roll.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have some victory points on hand, like sitting in your bank, you can spend those to add to your goal roll also. So let's say you're thinking, well, I might not make that roll with 11. You could say spend 3 victory points to bring it up to 14 or 15. That'd be 14, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then you roll that or less. So you have options at every different stage, even if you're not happy with necessarily how good you are. Some characters are going to be really good at some things, not so good at others, but they can make up for not being so good with it by spending victory points.
Cool. So those are about all the questions we have that I can see right now. If people have more questions, you can continue to ask them here. This is eventually going to go up on YouTube. You can ask it there. We might put it on. We'll probably put it on our Facebook page, the Ulysses Facebook page. Check it out there. And if you want to hear more and read more and listen to more Fading Suns, I just put up a blog post on ulysses-us.com, and that's called Fading Suns the Media. And Bill has been on a bunch of podcasts lately. So if you want to hear more about Fading Suns, but also more about Bill and kind of his experience in the RPG industry, working at White Wolf and starting Fading Suns, and specifically working on Werewolf, which he worked on a lot. You can check out. There's the Werewolf the podcast. He was interviewed on. He was interviewed on Plot Points with Ben Riggs, where he talks a lot about White Wolf stuff, and then Tabletop Babble with James Introcaso just came out today, which I have not gotten a chance to listen to, so I don't know what he talks about on that one. And then you can also listen to Heretical Musings, which is Bill and Andrew, the other creator of Fading Suns. They talked last week about some of the same stuff and more. They got into some more details, and then they're going to continue to have that. So you guys are doing that tomorrow as well?
Yeah, Heretical Musings tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Ulysses Twitch channel. Nice.
And then we've got actual play, a bunch of actual play games. So JM, our GM in residence, is running a Fading Suns game that he's been running for a couple of years. They're still running that one, but since people in Colorado where they're based out of are kind of on lockdown, they've kind of stopped that game, and they started another game going on. So the Annals of Antioch are up, and that's going to be Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. There's 1 or 2 episodes up of that so far. There is some 1 and 2 episodes of the Crew of the Oh Boy, which is a kind of continuation of their old campaign, but they sort of started at a new point. And there's also a small flashback episode, so there's more of that. There's also a playtest being done by the folks at Alloyed Clavicle. We hosted them, and they're on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock Pacific, which you can check out on our Twitch stream. We'll host them again next week. And then there have been several articles that have come out, Bell of Lost Souls, EN World, and then conversation on RPGNet and Reddit. So all of those places are great places to kind of learn more about Fading Suns, and of course go back to the Kickstarter. help us hit that 100,000 euro goal for the metal tokens and to find out what's coming up next. Um, Thanks, Bill. It's been great chatting with you. I've learned a lot about Fading Suns. I knew some, but now I feel like I know a lot more. And where else can people find you if they want to talk more Fading Suns with you?
Well, I mean, they can find me on Twitter at @bridges. On Facebook, I'm here also, just under my own name. And there's my website at bill-bridges.com. But yeah, I'm all over the place on these places.
Awesome. And I am Robert Adducci. I'm the social media manager for Ulysses Spila, Ulysses International. You can find me on Twitter at Radu76 or under the Ulysses accounts at UlyssesINT. We're on Facebook. There's a Fading Suns Facebook page. There's a Fading Suns Twitter, which is at Fading Suns. So come check us out, chat with us. And there is also a Ulysses Discord server where we're in there chatting a bunch as well. So come talk Fading Suns with us and back the Kickstarter. Thanks, Bill. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks a lot. This was fun.
Bye bye.
Bye.